So this video is probably out of left field to longtime viewers of my channel, since I don't really do breakdowns of this sort usually. However, as a fan of horror, I feel it's time to bust out my own thoughts regarding a topic I care deeply about, but missed some real drama within it because I was busy with other shit. Meaningless shock value, also known as shock value just for shock value, is pretty self-explanatory really. It's the practice of filling a media with the most grotesque, horrific, and overall, well, shocking topics and depictions possible just for the sake of getting a reaction out of the audience, and therefore not actually contributing anything to the narrative or story, or even showing any sort of respect towards said topics. This is in contrast to meaningful shock value, which, yes, is meant to get a reaction out of a consumer, but also provides actual substance to the narrative. Here's an example. Let's say we have a murder mystery. The victims are found in typical ways you'd expect. Maybe a guy drowned, somebody had their throat slit, you know, the normal things you'd expect from such a story. Then let's say like 5 victims in, we discover a body that is just brutally murdered. We're talking like dismemberment, a gravely unnecessary amount of stab wounds, stomach cut wide open, you know, real gross shit. This will certainly left hook the reader out of nowhere. However, this sudden escalation just so happens to also foreshadow a twist where there's actually 2 killers and one of them is way more psychologically unstable than the other one. And on top of that, the story actually goes out of the way to demonstrate how this gruesome scene affects the people who have found the crime scene and what they do in response. This is probably the most basic example, but you can at least see the vision. It provided something. In contrast, meaningless shock value and the torrents of people who insist that using it is actual writing will continue to plague horror genres and wilt them away into mediocrity. Horror movies, creepypastas, horror games, and relatively recently analog horror, these are all horror genre mediums that started turning bare bones after their initial wave of popularity, and meaningless shock value is to blame. For example, creepypastas. Some of the earliest and more finely crafted creepypastas to grace the internet by storm were some of the most unnerving stories I had ever heard, one of which may have instilled a fear of windows in me for a month, but I was also like really young, so my shame regarding that is basically non-existent. But then, because creepypastas are such a recreatable art form, a wave of people came in, just took a random video game or TV show or what have you, slapped on phrases like hyper-realistic bloody eyes, and called it a day. Then the creepypasta medium was nothing but mediocre, literally copy-pasted, senseless details that nobody gave a shit about because they didn't mean anything. 2 more examples are especially controversial projects from the last decade: Dormitibus for horror games and The Painter by Urban Spook for analog horror. Both of these projects used topics such as pedophilia, necrophilia, zoophilia/bestiality, murder and dismemberment of young and unborn children, and brutal animal cruelty. All just for the purpose of making their villains seem so evil and scary or something. Meanwhile, said graphic topics are not used by the respective creators in any way to actually add anything to the narrative. They were thrown in just to get reactions out of people, or something like that. And boy howdy did they get reactions, cause both these projects were burned to the ground by rioters. And it's not like really dark subject matters just don't belong in horror writing. You can add them and have them work. They just need to actually serve a purpose in terms of the narrative, and the negative effects of these actions should be explored beyond the very obvious, oh, bad guy is bad because they're doing gross things. Here is a prime example. Blood Wash, one of my favorite horror games, did use one of these elements from earlier. The killer targets pregnant women and takes their unborn children. But the thing is, this actually serves a narrative purpose. Over time, with hints spread throughout the whole game from beginning to end, you find out the killer is a formerly pregnant woman who miscarried her child after an attempt on her life was made via arson. And the reason she's committing the crime she has been committing is out of a sense of resentment and jealousy. And you get to see people actually respond to this situation. The town starts becoming run down and people start evacuating elsewhere because they don't feel safe here. You see, there's actual substance here. It means something. The fact that things like Dormitibus and the Painter get torn to shreds, while things like Blood Wash and similar projects with actual stories get praised, I think paints a crystal clear message. Meaningless shock value is not writing, much less good writing. All it does is create something horrendously mediocre at best and downright disgusting and tasteless at worst. And probably the worst part of it all is the writers of these things. Writers and other creators who make meaningless shock value are more often than not what I like to call chronic backpedalers. People who, when presented with a situation they know they are wrong about, will continue to backpedal into any excuse they can make in an attempt to make whoever they're arguing with look like the idiot. However, in the process, they fail to realize that nothing they're saying actually solves the problem at hand, therefore the backpedaler is the one who ultimately ends up looking like a moron because nothing that warranted the criticisms in the first place has changed. For example, meaningless shock value writers, when their projects are inevitably called out for having terrible writing because all they do is tastelessly use the grossest thing they can imagine for literally no reason, the writer will start backpedaling. The most likely response will be something along the lines of, well, you just don't like my series because you can't handle really dark topics, or something of the sort. Completely missing the point, and therefore not solving the problem that the writing in your project fucking sucks. Like Urban Spook, if you want people to stop saying the Painter is nothing but shock value, you could actually do something that proves those people wrong, or instead you could say garbage like this and completely miss the point. If you made your analog series just to promote your artwork, that's fine. The paintings themselves are actually really good. But if you're gonna promote your art with a gimmick, it's still your job to actually make that gimmick good. Anyway, after all that ranting, it's not hard to see why meaningless shock value kills horror. Between mediocre at best writing and arrogant at best people behind it continuing to flood whatever medium is popular at the time, and permanently staining the expectations regarding it, yeah, it's going to ruin said mediums in the eyes of everyone who witnesses the display. As horror fans, the best we can do is not only expect this fate to infect any horror medium, because it will eventually happen, but to also have standards when it does happen. And when the creators of these horrendous projects try to dodge the criticism by making excuses, do not tolerate deflection. You let them know that unless they actually just get good at writing and provide some actual narrative, their excuses are not solving the problems with their series. Anyway, this has been my breakdown devolved into a rant regarding meaningless shock value. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you another time. Bye.